And I began to realize that in this generation, we needed to make a fresh case for why the church still matters.
The emphasis taking away from the individual and having like a significance on the unity as a congregation.
The Bible presents it as the Christian life as entering into a family, that we are becoming family with each other.
And if we are able to pick up those molds and put in a new type of bread or clean those out, that is the process of what God really truly encourages the congregation to uphold.
Dr. Carmen Imes is an associate professor of Old Testament. She has appeared on over 100 radio shows and podcasts like The Bible Project, Think Biblically, and The Holy Post. And she has a YouTube channel where she releases Torah Tuesday videos. She writes for Christianity Today, Politics of Theology, and The Well, and has written her own books like Bearing God's Name, Being God's Image, and her newest, Becoming God's Family, Why the Church Still Matters, which was released in October of 2025.
When we don't gather with other believers, there's a dimension of our Christian life we will actually not experience.
So Dr. Imes, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you feeling today?
I feel all right. I'm glad to be here talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about you. Having office hours to know you more personally, to know about the churches and your books. So let's go ahead and kick it off. In office hours, we really love to start off by asking your origin story. So how did you come to faith?
I was born into a Christian family, and I cannot remember a time where we were not fully engaged in church and fully following Jesus. So I had the privilege of being raised by parents who prioritized faith and who loved the church. And I actually never went through a season of profound disillusionment with the church. I just always wanted more and always wanted to be connected. So I've certainly revised my views over the years. I've grown, and I've had hard things happen in church or faith-wise, but never like a period of walking away.
Gotcha, that's so amazing. So there wasn't like a specific moment where it was a turning point into Christ, but more like a mutual presence of Him throughout your life?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of some moments, like I think I was 3 when I first prayed the sinner's prayer. And when I was 8, I remember some missionaries coming to our church to talk about missions and how they needed more Christians to be involved in sharing the gospel. And I thought, I could do that because I'm not tied down. So that was a kind of key point in which I started envisioning my future as being one in ministry. So when I was 12, I went through a period of time where I felt like God was specifically calling me into ministry. And I imagined at the time that I would end up as a missionary. I was thinking in the Amazon jungle with a tribe that needed the Bible translated. That was kind of what I thought I was going to end up doing. But He's just gradually led me into academic ministry. And so I would say there have been turning points in my life, but they haven't been like away from faith or toward faith. It's just been more like, what is God calling me to do and how is He calling me to serve?
Wow, that's an amazing story. I love how it's just God was just throughout in your life, just present, being present in it. And then, I think that's amazing. And then you also dabbled in your academic background, which I was going to ask you next. So how can you tell us more about that on your journey to becoming a professor?
Yeah, so I went to Bible college because that was the natural place to prepare to be a missionary. So I studied Greek because I thought I was going to be a Bible translator, and most Bible translators start with the New Testament. So that was kind of my plan. And then I met my husband, the man who became my husband, and we got married after my junior year. And it was during my college years that I thought, oh man, imagining myself as a college professor was like, that would be so amazing. So what I pictured was that we would become missionaries for 20 years someplace else, and then I would come back and be a missions professor. So my husband and I became missionaries. We moved to the Philippines to reach Muslims, and we were only there for 2.5 years, which is not long enough to be a missions professor. It's not enough field experience. And so I was like, well, I know I want to go on for more schooling, and I really love the Bible, and so maybe I should study Bible instead and be a Bible professor. So I started a master's degree when I had little kids and went through my master's at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. While I was raising kids, it was kind of like those were the two things I was doing. And then we moved to Wheaton College where I did my PhD. And by that time, we realized, okay, we're not going to be living overseas. I'm going to be a Bible professor, but I wonder where God's going to take me. And my dream was to go back to my alma mater, which is Multnomah University in Portland. It's a good thing God didn't take me back there because they closed this year. Oh. So I didn't know a ton about Biola at the time, but I can see how God used my life to prepare me for this school. And I have loved being here so much.
Well, I mean, we love you being here so much too. Thank you so much for being our professor.
Yeah.
And then while you were in that academic journey, how did you start studying about the church specifically?
I don't know that I actually ever did a deep study in the church during my academic journey. For me, it was the Old Testament that really captured my attention. And so that's what led me to be an Old Testament professor, because I noticed that people struggle a lot with the Old Testament. And I thought if I could understand it and help other people understand it, then it would be a service to the church. So the church was sort of like the backdrop to what I wanted to study. But then during COVID, I noticed more and more people disconnecting from the church. I think our routines got disrupted. We weren't like going in person for a while, for however long. We couldn't do that. And I think what happened for a lot of people is like, oh, turns out if I don't go to church, the world keeps turning. And I kind of like having a morning off. And so maybe I won't go, maybe I'll just watch online. And I began to realize that in this generation, we needed to make a fresh case for why the church still matters. It's not obvious anymore because people are thinking, oh, I can access spiritual content in other ways. Why would I need to go to a building?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very clear concern that we have. And maybe it might be the perfect time to talk about your book, actually.
Yeah.
It's called Becoming God's Family. Please tell us more about it. And it talks about why we shouldn't give up on the church.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little more about that?
Yeah, so the real moment when I knew we needed this book, I was sitting across a campfire from an extended family member, and he was like, yeah, I still believe in Jesus. I still believe all that stuff in the Bible, but I don't need church. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. And as I was thinking about how to respond to that objection to church, there were lots of things going on in my head. First of all, wow, okay, so he thinks that you can just follow Jesus without the church, but I don't think the Bible actually gives us any vision for a Christian who isn't part of a church. Like this isn't an individual decision that we make that then kind of follows us. Like I can just follow Jesus all by myself and it's between me and God. The Bible presents it as the Christian life as entering into a family, that we are becoming family with each other. And the New Testament letters are wrestling with all the ways that gets messy, right? What do we do when someone in the family is disobeying God? Or what do we do if there's conflict between people? Or what do we do if there's sorrow or rejoicing and all of that? And so it was sitting across that campfire that I realized, okay, we need to make the case for church. And I wonder if part of our problem is that we tend to come to the Bible looking for what it says about me personally, and we miss all the ways that it's talking about us. So the book really is my attempt to show from beginning to end how the story is about God's gathered people and how God's presence shows up when we gather together. And so that we'll be missing out if we don't gather. When we don't gather with other believers, there's a dimension of our Christian life we will actually not experience. And I would argue that we can't fully flourish, we can't become all we're meant to be without each other. And it's not just like passing in the hallway is enough, but like actually doing life together in ways that are deeply meaningful and connected.
I see. I think those are such intriguing ideas. The emphasis taking away from the individual and having like a significance on the unity as a congregation. Yeah. As there's so many commandments that are just about relationships with people and how we can cope together into taking the next step into Christ. And for along the past few years, that's definitely been something that's been declining, especially as you said with COVID and stuff like that. And I'm really glad there is a person like you that are trying to bring it back together, and I think it's so important, and I think me and all the viewers would love to learn more about it. So for like the next question, I remember in the books there were stuff about even hard topics such as some scandals, maybe some abuses, and these are hard things that other outsiders might not be able to take in that well. How would Christians and even non-Christians cope with these ideas? And what would be your take on it? And I guess a connecting point is like the biggest problem in churches. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about those two?
Let me clear my throat, and then I'd love to.
Of course.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because although I described my extended family member disconnecting from church just because he didn't want people telling him what to do, some people have walked away from the church for deeper matters. Maybe they've seen abuse cover up in the church, or they've witnessed hypocrisy or narcissism in church leaders, and they've been disillusioned, and they've said, I don't want to have anything to do with an institution that's this unhealthy. And so I would want to say to anyone who's feeling that or has experienced church hurt, it matters that our institutions such as churches are healthy. And so if you have noticed something that seems off, I am not asking you to just silence that part of your brain and just ignore it or cover over it. And I think the Bible doesn't ignore it, and the Bible doesn't cover over it. So I actually begin my trek through Scripture with the story of Abraham and Sarah. That's the first family that God chooses through whom he will bless all nations. And some of the first stories about Abraham and Sarah are so problematic. Abram traffics his wife twice to avoid getting hurt himself. He profits handsomely from trading away his wife. Then they end up with slaves in the household, and Sarah mistreats their Egyptian slave, Hagar. They mistreat her together by sexually exploiting her, and then it says Sarah further mistreats her to the point that she runs away. And what I think is really remarkable about the Bible is that it's not holding up Abraham and Sarah as perfect examples. It actually shows us their flaws, and it shows us those flaws in such a way as to say, like, this is not okay. And God shows up in the story, but he does not show up in Abraham's tent to pat him on the back and say, way to step in there and show her who's boss. You tell her. You need to keep her in line. He's not bolstering Abraham's authority. He's actually out in the wilderness with Hagar. And he's comforting her, bringing her food and water, and giving her hope for her future. And I think that gives us a picture of how God responds to those who are hurt or abused by the church today. That God is actually with you in the hurt, and he's wanting to minister to you. But he actually tells Hagar to go back to Abraham and Sarah. And this is one of those troubling texts that students sometimes come to me and say, like, how could God tell her to go back to her abusive home? And I don't think this is a template for returning to abuse. Hagar, at the moment that she runs away, is pregnant and vulnerable, and she will die in the wilderness. So God has her go back to this household, even though it's messy and problematic, in order to save her life, I think. And later he allows her to leave and separate herself from Abraham's family. I think there's a lesson in here for us that to notice problems in the church is one thing, but to separate ourselves entirely from the church is actually going to cut us off from the source of life that we need. So sometimes I've used the example of grocery shopping. Say you go to Walmart to get groceries, and you come home and you open up your bag and you realize that the loaf of bread that you bought is all moldy. And you're like, why did this happen? Why are they selling moldy bread? And you throw it away, or you bring it back to Walmart and get a refund or whatever. You rightly recognize that you should not eat that bread. But you don't decide in that moment, I am never going to eat bread again. I'm done with groceries. You become more vigilant so that next time you go to the store, you're checking over that loaf of bread before you put it in your cart. And I think we need to be vigilant as we're choosing where to worship, that we're choosing a church that takes seriously the need to protect people, that has a plan in place to protect children, to make sure abuse doesn't happen, that there are checks and balances on leadership, and that there's a plan for what to do if accusations come forward against someone, that they're already thinking through how to be a safe and healthy community. That would be like the search for bread that's not moldy. Like, you want to go to a place that has thought this through and is taking seriously the possibility of an abuse of power.
I see. I think it's really, really interesting to see a different perspective on the Hagar and Abraham story, especially by using this relationship aspect that God is giving into the people.
Yeah.
I think especially from what I was hearing, there was like a sense of you have to separate what happens in the church in terms of sin, because those are things that are not of God. And if we are able to pick up those molds and put in a new type of bread or clean those out, that is the process of what God really truly encourages the congregation to uphold. And it is definitely a part that I do think we do miss a lot in churches these days. We focus on the sins, which we should, as you said, but we take it in and we have different solutions that are not necessarily the best at these days.
Yeah, I think I would encourage people. Let me think how I want to say this, because I had a thought.
You can think how long as you want to.
Yeah.
You're all good.
Yeah, people just throw out church altogether instead of being vigilant. Okay, now I know what I was going to say. I think when it comes to church, it is messy and there is a possibility of getting hurt, but that's true in any relationship, right? If you start dating someone, you are opening yourself up to getting hurt, because when we love someone, we're opening ourselves up to them hurting us. And so, yes, there's always a possibility of hurt when we bring ourselves to church and we open ourselves up to these people, to become family with these people. That means these people might let me down. They might disappoint me. They might not show up for me when I need them, or they might actually do something that harms me or others. But if we just go into protective mode, like, okay, now I can't be in any relationships because I might get hurt, then we miss out on the importance of relationships, right? We can't flourish without deep relationships with each other. So I would say to anyone who's kind of feeling uncertain about the church, yeah, it is a risk, but it's a risk we have to take to get where God wants us to go.
Gotcha. That makes it so much easier to understand the point of like, it's prevalent in every single relationship that we have. It's the next step that we have to take.
And we shouldn't shy away from doing that hard work of having hard conversations. And I think sometimes maybe what we see are headlines about churches and failures, and we're not seeing as many of the happy ending stories where two people had a disagreement and they did the hard work of talking it through, working through that disagreement, and they came to a healthy place together. And I think we need to share those stories because it's important for us to recognize that relationships aren't going to just be automatic. They take energy and effort.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great, Dr. Ryan. We'll definitely try to take in some of those thoughts and try to apply it to our churches that we have today. So if we get a little more specific to Biola, what are some things that you see with Biola students with their churches? Some goods or bads? Anything you want to say to that?
Well, I haven't walked up and down the halls of the dorm on a Sunday morning to see who's going to church and who's not. So I don't actually have a way of knowing what percentage of our students are actually involved in church. But I can tell you this. When I show up at church and I see tons of Biola students, I am so encouraged, because these are students who are choosing of their own accord to go to church. And I recognize it's different when you've moved, especially when you've moved away from home and you don't have your parents reminding you to go to church or saying, okay, we're going now. It's a lot easier to just sleep in, have a morning off. And I am so encouraged when I see college students showing up at church, because I know they're making that choice for themselves. They're deciding, I want this. And I have seen the most beautiful intergenerational friendships develop at church. This is one of those things that doesn't happen on campus. When you're on campus, you're not seeing children. You're not seeing older people, except for professors. And you have like maybe limited engagement with professors. But when you show up at church on Sunday to worship, you are making yourself part of an intergenerational family that walks with each other through the entire lifespan. This is what makes Biola different than a church. There are church-like things about Biola. We get together, we hear the word preached, we worship together, but we're not usually baptizing people. We're not showing up at the hospital for each other when a baby is born. We're not performing weddings on campus. Like what we need is a community that's going to be with us from birth to death. We don't have funerals usually on campus, although we had one this semester. We had a memorial service, but that's not typical because this is a community that's gathered for educational purposes. So the range of what we do is more limited than what a church does. And I think Biola is important, but it can't replace the church because the church is showing up for you and for the community in a like wider range of ways.
Thank you for that. I think that was a often discussed topic, Biola and how Biola can be serving as a church, and I think that clarifies a lot.
And we are fellow believers, and so we can do things together. You know, we could head to the beach and evangelize together, and that would be something that's churchly to do. But if you're here as a student, you might be here for 4 years, maybe 5. If you do a graduate degree here, maybe you're going to be here for 6 or 7 years total. That's a limited season. It's not a replacement for this lifespan development. And I think what I've noticed is that students who plug in at church are getting out of, okay, let me reverse that. When you don't plug into a church, it can be easy to just sort of live in your head or live in this sort of bubble because you're with mostly people who are 18 to 22 years old all the time. And that gives you an artificial slice of humanity and of the human lifespan where certain things are amplified and other things are totally forgotten. But when you show up at church and you're worshiping with families and with people across the lifespan, it sort of, I think, right sizes some of the anxieties of the college years when you can see, they've been walking with God faithfully for decades. They probably have experience with the kind of things I'm wrestling with, like, what should I major in? Or what if I don't get this internship? Or the things that feel really big in college. As you start to talk with people who are outside the college years, you can kind of get that perspective on what you're going through, and maybe it can help you to relax about some of the decisions that you have to make.
Gotcha. I think it's a part where Biola students are. There's a couple of Biola students. I think that were not able to find churches, and either they couldn't or they didn't think that they needed to. And I think it is a message from Dr. Imes, the professor.
Go to church.
And then, could you also? Could this also be a good place where you can repeat the part where you talked about during the first half of how to find a good church, what you should look for? Can you tell us that one more time for people who might be looking for one?
Well, I think one thing that's a benefit these days is we have the internet and churches have websites. And so you can actually shorten your church by doing some research. So whether you have a car or transportation or not is one factor. And if you don't, then you're looking at a radius of walkable churches. And we actually have quite a few options that are within walking distance of campus. And you can check out their websites to figure out where do they fall on the theological spectrum so that you can assess what's important to you. We have Nazarene, Foursquare, Anglican, Baptist, Friends, Evangelical Free, Catholic, like all within walking distance. And so there are a lot of options. And so just looking online can help you see what those are. I even noticed a new Calvary Chapel church popped up within walking distance this week, actually in my neighborhood. So there are options in the neighborhood. And then I would encourage you to find a friend to go with and walk there together, because it can be kind of intimidating to walk into a new space all by yourself. But if you go and check it out, I think there's so many different things that churches can do or ways that they can do a service. And I would say be open to being surprised. Maybe you've come from a particular tradition. You're only going to be here for a few years. This might be an opportunity to try out a different tradition. To instead of looking for something that's exactly familiar, maybe stretch yourself a little bit. I know a lot of students who go to Redeemer Church. That's where we've been for the past 4 years. It's within walking distance of campus, and it's liturgical. And I don't know if most of these students have been in liturgical churches in their background. We have like set prayer movements that we go through in the service with pre-planned times of confession. We have communion every Sunday. So there's a kind of rhythm to the service that's the same every week that I think a lot of students have found beautiful, even if that's not the tradition they came from. But we also have just like a wide range of maybe you've come from a more liturgical tradition and you're ready to experience something new. And then you can check out the Nazarene church that's within walking distance and get really vibrant worship and people who are investing in the neighborhood. So yeah, there are a lot of options around, and I would say check it out and make it an adventure. It will probably take a little time to find a place to land, but if you're diligent, I think you'll find a place where you can make it your spiritual home while you're at Biola.
Gotcha. And then as a theology professor and someone who was in ministry, are there specific characteristics about churches that you value and you think we should also look into? Yeah.
I think the number one thing I'm looking for is, does this church uphold the scriptures as their authority? And is it centered around the Word of God? And if you're at a church that's like, the Bible's a good suggestion, or, we don't need to really take it that seriously, like some of it's outdated, then I would say that's not a great place to land. But if they take the scriptures seriously, if they're making space for community, for relationships to develop, and for every member of the church to exercise their spiritual gifts, that's, I think, important. I have seen lots of college students serve in ministry. Maybe it's working in the nursery or in children's ministry. Maybe it's showing up early to make the coffee and cut the donuts. Maybe it's collecting the offering during the service, or being on the missions council, or showing up for a work day. Like, there are ways to get involved. And when you get involved in church, even just on a limited basis, maybe it's an hour a week that you're able to give, or a couple hours a month, that's a way to meet people and connect across the lifespan. And I think is so important. So there's lots of things to look for, but those are some of the things that I'm watching for.
I think those are very significant things, and I think they're really helpful in finding churches. I wish I had that when I was a freshman, first looking for my church.
I think sometimes people are looking for like the best sermon and the highest quality music and like a place where I feel totally like this is grabbing my attention. And I would suggest that it's actually more important for us to find a place where people are faithfully trying to follow Jesus. And it might look a little less flashy. Maybe the sermons are not quite so engaging. Maybe the worship team is sometimes off key, but these are real people who are doing life together, and they're showing up week after week trying to follow Jesus. And often those churches are smaller. So the bigger the church, the more slick and well-produced the service will be, but the harder it will be to have that like actual relational connection with people. It becomes easy to just slip in and slip out without really connecting. And then it sort of, to me, is more like chapel, where you're showing up and then you're slipping off to class. It's not a place where community is formed. So if you're going to a church and it's feeling like nothing is happening other than what happens in chapel, then probably you need to lean in more fully to the life of the church. Join a Bible study or an accountability group, a prayer group, something that will help you make a deper connection.
Yeah, I think that emphasizes again on your point on the relationship aspect of it, how like people looking at people who has been in faith for like 10 years rather than 2. Yeah. I think these are all kind of coming back together, and it's really what it means to be a congregation in Christ.
Yeah.
So another question that we have is, you are an expert in the Old Testament, and I was wondering how well that applies because it is a different perspective in the modern churches. So how would you cope with those two type of knowledges together?
Yeah, I think probably people who pick up the book will be most surprised because it's a book about the church. Probably the biggest surprise will be, like 3/4 of this book is about the Old Testament. And when we hear church, we think New Testament. But actually the word for church in the New Testament is ecclesia. And that's the same word used in the Old Testament to translate the words that talk about Israel assembled around God's presence at Mount Sinai. So they are the ecclesia, the assembly. And so if we want to look at what does it mean to gather in worship, we have to go back to the beginning of the story and see what is God calling his people out of? What is he inviting them into? What is it supposed to look like? And the Old Testament is full of stories of times it went well and times it went not so well. And so I feel like it has a lot to offer the conversation about the church. And it usually doesn't enter into that conversation. So it felt like that was a way I could make a more unique contribution.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Imes. We are about getting to that time where we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
We just have one last question on is there anything else you would like to add to the podcast? Yeah.
I have been, so my husband and I have been married for 27 years. Wait, let me do my math real quick. It's 2025. I want to make sure I got it. Yeah, it's been 27 years. And we have moved 16 times in those years. We've moved a lot because of missions and school mostly, and then coming to Biola. And that means we've been in a lot of different churches. And I feel like there can be a tendency among young people to be a little jaded, like churches are all full of hypocrites, or the church is so divided and I don't like denominations, so I just don't want to even have anything to do with it. And what I see when I have been in all these different denominations is that each one has captured something that's true about God and his word, and they do that. They point to that really well, and maybe other things they neglect. So I haven't been to one church that does everything well, but each one has its strengths. And when I look across the span of my life, I'm so grateful for the ways I've seen God at work in different kinds of churches. And I'm also grateful for the ways that I've become part of his family in all of these different ways over and over again. So I would just encourage people to persevere and to lean in. Sometimes young people think institutions are problematic. That's where abuse happens. I'm just gonna hang out with other believers instead, and we'll just be more low key about it because we don't want to get into the problems of institutions. Gotcha. And what happens when you just get together with your friends to pray and read scripture together is that group grows, and then eventually you need to start having more parameters or more structure. And then you realize, okay, we need to make sure the money is well taken care of and nobody's stealing it. And we need to make sure our children are protected. And what I'm saying is eventually you have an institution. Institutions are important because they take our energy and they allow it to be sustained over the long haul. So you can have a lot of youthful passion for I'm just going to change the world. I don't need institutions. But you will burn out if it's just you and your passion. We need each other, and we need thoughtful structures to steward our passion and to kind of put all our passions together so that it can last for, Biola's been around for 117 years. It didn't last by being anti-institutional. It had to form a plan. And sometimes institutions are slow and cumbersome because they're designed to prevent us from going off the rails. And so the slowness that you see about institutions that might feel like it's kind of a turnoff is actually what allows them to survive for a long time. So the older I get, the more I appreciate institutions. And I would say to anyone who's feeling kind of I don't know about the institutional church, if you gather with believers long enough, you too will have to institutionalize. So the question is, how can we be healthy in our institutions?
Perfect. I mean, that being said, I think I'm already convinced to
awesome.
Being engaged more in churches. Just changing my perspectives on what it means to be a congregation. And I just learned so much from this podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Imes.
Thanks, Jay, for having me.
Just one last fun question.
Okay.
If we go to your office hours, pursuit is.
Yes.
What will we find in your office? Like, what's your favorite object in your office?
I have a couple really fun ones. I have a piece of pottery that's from the late Bronze Age, like time of Abraham, that I got to pick up at Shiloh. I also have a murex shell, which is the kind of shell that you get blue or purple dye from. So the high priestly garments are dyed blue, and it's from the shell. And I have a thread that was dyed with the shell in my office. So those are two things that I think are really cool.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Wow, a Bronze Age pottery from the time of Abraham.
I also have a Bible Project poster on Exodus that's signed by Tim Mackey and John Collins. So that's also cool.
We'll eventually get them on the podcast too.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we'll get up there. But anyways, thank you so much for everything, and we appreciate your time so much, and we can't wait to see your book take off into the world. Yeah, I'll definitely go check it out too. And can I get it on like Amazon and stuff like that?
Yep, it's available everywhere you buy books, including the stack in my office.
Let's go. Yeah. So with that, I'm Jae Koo, and this is Office Hours. We'll see you next time.